Hello, everyone. I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today. We're excited to bring you another of our interviews, and this is an exciting topic because it's one I'm not as familiar with, and I love learning new things. But it's a really important topic, talking about AI and learning models and how to apply them to COVID-19, which is the challenge on all of our minds, I think, in all of our lives. So we have a great panel discussion here today. We have Anthony Costa. He's assistant professor of neurosurgery and director at Sinai BioDesign at Mount Sinai. We also have Fiona Gilbert. She's professor of radiology at University of Cambridge. And finally, we have Mona Flores, global head of medical AI at NVIDIA. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, John.
Hi.
Yeah, so I'm excited to have this discussion and to learn, right? And that's the beauty of what we do. We get to learn a lot, and I think our audience will love this topic. But before we dive into the topic, let's just go around and have each of you introduce yourself. Anthony, do you want to kick us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Happy to. So I'm Anthony Costa. As you mentioned, I'm an assistant professor here at the Mount Sinai Health System in New York City. I run a couple of research groups here at Mount Sinai. Sinai BioDesign you mentioned, and the other is AI Sinai. And principally, we are interested in machine learning work, so typically in the imaging space and in the natural language processing space. We've had a great deal of interest in the generalizability of artificial intelligence models for some time. And so what we'll talk about here today is a great opportunity to use technology to advance some of those interests in the service of something that we really care about here today.
Great. Glad to have you here. Fiona, you want to go next?
Yes, thanks, John. So I'm Fiona Gilbert. I'm a radiologist. I'm actually a breast radiologist, and that's my kind of area of special expertise. Some of my trainees would say my only expertise. But I run a research group in Cambridge. I'm head of department there. And as well as doing, technology assessment in the different modalities that we use in breast imaging, I'm really interested in AI, and AI's really taken off in breast imaging because of the massive volume of mammograms that we see. But in the pandemic, many of us got correctly turned our attention towards what we could do to address coronavirus, and so I got involved with this project with Mona because we could contribute cases and things, and we'll talk about that later.
Awesome. Great to have you here, Fiona. And Mona, last but not least.
Sure, thanks, John. So my name is Mona Flores. I am the global head of medical AI at NVIDIA. I'm also a cardiothoracic surgeon. Prior to coming to NVIDIA, I was practicing, and then I was the chief medical officer of a digital health company. And then I came to NVIDIA because I really believe in AI and its mission in healthcare. And as you know, NVIDIA has been in healthcare for more than 10 years now. The part I play is helping translate AI into healthcare applications and clinical medicine.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you all here. Now, we put together this interview because you guys announced a AI prediction model for patients with COVID-19 systems. Maybe Mona, you want to start and tell us, how does this work? What's gone into the effort, and what's the approach you're taking?
Sure. So this prediction model was trained using federated learning, which is a distributed way of training AI models. And this is where Fiona and Anthony and 18 other sites actually came together as a collaboration to train these models. As you know, in healthcare and in other disciplines too, but specifically in healthcare, it is very hard to get a big corpus of data that is centralized in order to train these models, which is very well needed for these deep learning models. So the idea here was, how can we leverage the data at each of the different sites without having to bring it together and compromise patient privacy or the privacy of the data. So we were able to use the data from each of the sites at the site itself and then bring the learnings from the local training that was happening at each of the sites to create one combined model that is actually not only better than the models that each site would have been able to provide on their own limited data, but it's also more generalizable. As Anthony was saying before, generalizability in AI is something that is very much desired, and people are looking at how do we do that. Well, federated learning is one way to do this, because you are training it on such a not only a large amount of data, but also a diverse amount of data that allows you to get to a model that is usable in different places, even in places where it hasn't seen any of the data, or it was not trained at that site.
So let's talk about that federated model. Anthony, maybe you could chime in on, why did you get involved and what did it take to get your organization to work together? I know that's often a challenge in healthcare. So,
Sure.
what was your take on it?
Yeah, so we've been interested in generalizability for some time, as so many in the field have, and one of the things that is unique and sort of a confluence of needs in the medical deep learning space is that most of our data is siloed at institutions, and those institutions have different patient populations, have different things. They have, in many ways, different instruments, different standards in terms of the types of data that they will take. For example, when a patient presents at the emergency room with COVID-like symptoms or suspected COVID. And so we were really excited to have the opportunity to take our Mount Sinai data, which, sure, we're a big, diverse health system in New York City, but our patient cohort may look very different than, for example, at Cambridge or at the National Taiwan University Hospital System. And so for us to be able to take the wealth of data that we have, combine that with that data from 19 other sites, in the service of ensuring not only that we meet our privacy obligations, both legally and ethically for our patients and the health system, but also in the service of making sure that we build a model that's going to be generalizable across many different deployments. And as I'm sure we'll talk about later, the performance improvement and generalizability we've been able to quantify using this approach, and really seriously improve its ability to be deployed in a generalizable way.
That's interesting, the generalizability. I hadn't thought about that. Fiona, what was your, and how did you get your organization involved? And were you concerned about the privacy? Because I think that's what concerns many people when you start talking federated model, is like, wait, so I think there's two folds. One is, are you going to keep my data private? And two, am I giving up my, internal, resources that are unique to me and I should leverage for my patients because that's my competitive advantage, right? I mean, I think those are the two concerns with the federated. How did you approach it, and why were you excited to get on board?
So, well, I felt this was a really exciting project. We were in Cambridge, we were relatively lucky. And I'm touching wood here that we're not going to get more cases, but so we didn't have that many cases of COVID in Cambridge. Cambridge had relatively low rates of infection, so we were pretty fortunate compared with some of the bigger centres. But we were obviously very keen to try and help develop tools which were going to help clinicians going forward and triaging patients into the appropriate type of bed, whether it be a ITU bed or a ward with just a bit of ventilation. And so we were very keen to participate in this. And as you say, one of the big deals that we've got is around information governance and the regulatory the rules that currently exist correctly to protect patients, most importantly, but also to protect hospitals from inadvertently, releasing data and the fines are huge. Sure. And so hospitals are rightly very conscious about what they let external bodies do with the data, and that includes the university. And we're so closely aligned with our hospital. We're kind of, we're completely kind of embedded in the organizations. But even so, we still went to ethics to get full ethics approval to be able to participate in this project. But in fact, interestingly, I remember it was a Friday afternoon ethics committee, and they were, we put the application in, and we kind of, myself, my postdoc, and my PhD student, we kind of all dialed into the meeting, and they said, actually, great application, we have no questions. And
Wow.
that's the first time I've gone to an ethics committee, they've not been worried about the data. And the reason they weren't worried was because the data was not leaving our institution. It was not leaving the safe, regulated environment, with all the governance structures in place. And that was for them, it was a no-brainer. Of course they were going to let us take part. And they felt very happy with the way the whole project had been constructed.
So I could just chime in. I'd just like to say that I had a very similar experience at Mount Sinai. So it's really nice to hear that this type of approach is being accepted as a way that we can really share data, not share data, but share the resources and the benefits of that data across health systems on a very short timescale. We had a program at Mount Sinai called the Mount Sinai COVID Informatics Center, which had constructed. We were here in New York, and we were hit very, very badly very early on with COVID. So we had a large data set to curate. And so a really awesome team of people had put together a multimodal data set for use in research projects. And I came to them with this, just as you mentioned, Dr. Gilbert, that the data wasn't going to leave the institution, but we were still going to be able to combine forces to address this issue. And I was approved in almost no time.
Wow.
Yeah, if I can add to that, not only is the data actually not leaving the institution and no one has access to it except, that its own particular institution, but, and other efforts you had to, if you were to collaborate on a training like this, you would have to put the data in one place, you would have to anonymize the data. The data didn't even have to be anonymized here because no one had access to it. So it's just, another layer of complexity that was removed from being able to do this training. Wouldn't you say that, Fiona, Anthony?
Oh, absolutely. It made it much, much easier. And as soon as our information governance people, and we've got, a chief information officer in the trust where we're not allowed to do anything with data unless he fully understands the project, they could completely see the merits of it and completely see this was a great way forward of working in the future.
So what is shared Mona then? Like, I love that the data gets to stay there, and I love it. You don't have to de-anonymize it because in many ways it loses some value when you do, and there's risk and all sorts of things. But so it's just doing the learning on those data sets, and then those learnings are passed back, or is that the structure of how this is training?
Yeah, I could call it magic, but it's not. It's really what you just said.
It's math.
No, I said magic, but it really is actually mathematical weights that are being transferred between not even between the sites themselves, as in actually before this meeting, probably Anthony and Fiona have never even met. So it's not the sites were not even sharing any information. It was the federated learning server that was exchanging weights, mathematical weights back and forth between the locally trained model. It would locally train, it would send these weights back to the server. The server would wait for every site to finish its local training and send these weights, and it would aggregate them in a specific methodology that we have. And then it would send back the weights to each of the sites to go through this iteration again of local training. Anthony, I don't know if you want to add more to that from the technical side.
I just wanted to say I have a funny anecdote about the fact that Professor Gilbert and I have never met. In addition, we have never met. That's true. We've never collaborated before. But I actually have a very strong collaborator with whom I've worked over 4 years, an international collaborator, and we didn't realize mutually that we had both contributed to this initiative until after it was over, because it's that transparent. There's really no need for that to be true. Yes, that's been a very positive thing.
That's great. So Professor Gilbert, let's cut to the end, and then we'll work back from it. What was the result, right? Like, what's the outcome of this project that we've seen so far? As I understand it, you're taking information from an ED admission to understand, I believe, whether they should be on a respirator or not. Can explain that? What's the outcome? What does the AI engine result do to help, provide better care for the patient?
So the AI tool is based on data, the health record and the chest X-ray that's taken when the patient first comes into hospital. So it's all data that's collected within the first few hours. Things like, somebody's age, their blood pressure, their respiratory rate, what their oxygen saturations are, plus some other blood measures, and the chest X-ray. And from that, the algorithm can predict what the oxygen requirements are going to be for that patient at 24 hours and at 72 hours with remarkable accuracy. I mean, remarkable accuracy. And the thing that really, so we had a meeting with our ED consultants last week, and the thing that really appealed to them was that once they know, once they suspect somebody's got COVID, then they need to go to one of our red areas for the infected patients. But they need to know, they want to know, do they send them straight to ITU because they're going to need that ventilation within quite a short space of time? Or can they send them to quite a ward which doesn't have much oxygen support? Because we've got different, the way our hospital is set up is that we have different wards with different levels of nursing intensity and oxygen therapy. And so by knowing or by being sure about what an individual's requirements are, it means we don't have to keep shifting patients from ward to ward, which is really bad from an infection point of view, because you don't want cross infections and things. And it's much better from a resource use. It's much more efficient. And it means that they can clear the ED department much more quickly. So there were lots of things about the tool that really appealed to our ED consultants. And of course, it was funny when I was explaining to them, the ED consultants were kind of slightly, well, I can probably do this myself. And it's right, an experienced ED consultant, maybe in New York, who's seen lots and lots of cases of COVID, can probably do a lot of this, on Gestalt, on their intuition. But it's all those other doctors, the junior doctors, the people that have been drafted into A&E to really help, to man up during the COVID crisis, who are not experienced emergency department consultants. So I think this is where it's really going to help. It's going to give people that diagnostic confidence and confidence in their decision making as to where the patient would be best be placed in the hospital without having to keep, because every time you move a patient from one ward to another, there's a huge amount of paperwork and things that need to happen, handovers for the different clinical teams and things. It's just so much better if they can do it directly from the ED department quickly.
Well, and it feels like there's almost replaces some of that cognitive burden as well. Am I making the right decision? By seeing the AI confirming what they intuitively know, takes some of the cognitive burden away, I would think, as well, which I think is interesting. Plus, I mean, back to what you said, you probably couldn't have done this on your own. You couldn't have built this AI engine on your own. You didn't have enough COVID cases to be able to do it. So that's fascinating as well.
And it's the point that Anthony was making earlier. It's that we've only got a certain type of patients in Cambridge, and then you might get a completely different ethnic group from a really kind of small ethnic group in Cambridge, and then it's so much better if the tool is trained on a much more diverse population. It's much better, much more robust and reliable.
It's great.
Yeah, if I can chime in here, it's also, John, it's a second data point that these clinicians, even experienced clinicians, can look at. For instance, if somehow you thought that the patient is going to be fine and I'm just going to send them home, and then the AI is telling you, no, wait, we think they're going to need to be on a ventilator within 24 hours. It gives you a pause, and then you can go back and say, am I really that, do I really believe in the decision that I make, or did I miss a lab value? Did I miss something? So you look at it again, and it gives you just more information to inform your decision in the end. It is a decision support tool. It's not telling you what to do. It's just giving you more information.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, one of the things that I wanted to mention is that, not only does it give you that extra confirmation, but you know, in New York, you know, we have so many departments and so many people who are redeployed. And Professor Gilbert, you mentioned, you know, the people who might not be experts in this particular diagnostic task. However, we're also resource constrained in a crisis like this. And so a tool that, like you said, lifts some cognitive burden, even for those people who know very well what they're doing, but also provides the level of certainty in an environment in which that expertise is not always available. People are stretched very thin, I think is very important.
Or they're burnt out. Yeah, I think there's a lot of aspects to it that's interesting. So, you know, I know Fiona shared some of the data. You know, I don't know who's best to answer this. I don't know, Anthony or Mona maybe. What data was needed and how accessible is the data? And what, you know, have you had instances where that data wasn't accessible? How do you approach that?
So maybe Anthony, I'm gonna punt to you here because you actually were tasked with getting the data for your center, and then I'll fill in as needed.
Yeah, so I mentioned that we had an informatics center that was spun up that was principally tasked with the process of making sure that we collect, you know, broad data sets for COVID positive patients. And so this model takes in not only chest x-rays, and we provided some number of those chest x-rays to this study, but you also have a lot of EHR values that have to be matched to those patients, all within the context of their initial presentation to the emergency department. And so that process, for us at Mount Sinai, for my group, it was relatively straightforward. Now, I won't say that for the people who really organized the data, as we identified the need, especially at Mount Sinai, especially in New York City, that was being hit so hard, that we had an obligation to make sure that we had those data resources available, not only for us and for the future. And so I benefited significantly in this particular task from the recognition of the institution as well as others that data resources and data lakes like this would help research projects like the one that we've done. And so that really sped the process along. And we're certainly very proud of that data set at Mount Sinai.
Yeah, thankfully the data has been easier. I mean, I think if you would have asked us 10 years ago, could you get the EHR data and even the imaging data, the answer might have been maybe, or ask me in a year. So.
Right, the alternative is, of course, that we're manually scraping all of these things. And that's an incredibly time-intensive task, especially at a time where no one has the time to do that, frankly. And so yeah.
Having said that, Anthony, some of the sites actually that do not have, unfortunately, you know, the kind of data sets that you have built in the informatics infrastructure had to actually manually scrape the data and be, you know, so to your question specifically, John, it's like, what data did we gather? So as Anthony said, we had the chest X-ray data. We also had 21 features that you get from the EHR. Now, to the extent that you have an electronic medical record that you can extract information or write a script to get that information, that becomes easier. Where that is not available, you had to do it by hand and collect that information for every patient that entered the study.
Yeah, well, I think that EHR gets hammered so much and deservedly so in some cases. So I like to highlight when it's empowering as well, because we often forget that. Is this an ongoing model, or is this kind of a point in time prediction? Like, how does the model work? Is it something that constantly gets updated with new data, or is it kind of, here's the data, here's a prediction, and then move on? Or, maybe, I don't know, Fiona, do you know the details of how that works?
Well, at this point, the model's static, and we haven't really discussed whether the next phase should be more of an adaptive design. What people talk about sort of going forward is this sort of adaptive AI tools that you can build, and it may be that, you know, the next phase is when we're doing more testing, and at the end of that testing phase, all that information is then used to then adapt the model again. So ideally, a model would be learning. The challenge then is always, how do you make sure the model keeps on improving and isn't actually then, performance isn't then beginning to fall off. And so there have to be certain checkpoints to make sure that the model's still doing or performing as well as we think it should be.
Yeah, you want it to adapt, but you don't want to adapt and have the results worse, right?
Well, exactly. And that's always a danger. because there tends to be a sweet point around, well, yeah, different models behave differently, but sometimes you can tweak things and think, actually no, by adding in this other stuff, it's just things are deteriorating.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's next for this, Mona? I mean, you obviously have 18 organizations, and I guess I'm also interested, will this be able to be applied to smaller organizations that maybe don't have the resources of a Mount Sinai or Cambridge? How are you, what's the future of this model? What's next?
Yeah, well, actually, you bring up a very good point about active learning and continuous learning. And you can imagine now we actually have 20 different institutions that you can imagine building an ongoing perpetual platform where you can take this model, and as people have more data, then they can retrain, and we can go through the whole thing over and over again. This becomes a sticky point if you're ever going to take a model like this for regulatory approval. And I think even the FDA is still thinking about, how do we do this? How do we incorporate active learning and make sure that the new models, as Fiona said, did not get corrupted as we train them again. So it's a really good point, John. I'm not sure exactly where we're taking this next. I think we have a very good model to start with. We have a very good system of doing this. So we'll see where that takes us. I know that a lot of the sites are very interested in continuing the collaboration and maybe looking at other models too. And to your point of having, would this work at smaller hospitals? And for sure, even like some of our sites were teeny hospitals. So it's, the idea is because of this collaboration, we were able to train this to now take it to a hospital somewhere remote that no one has ever seen, that we haven't seen, to train in terms of data, and they can use this model. And we'll see, and that's all, again, food for new experimentation in the future. Is like, how will it perform? We think it's going to perform very well if we extrapolate from the validation data that we got in this study. But that's certainly, we can do more clinical trials on this, and more validation studies, and prospective clinical trials, if you may.
Yeah, and that goes to Anthony's point of generalizability and being able to spread it across. I think it's super interesting. As we kind of wrap up this discussion, like, it feels like to me this is a requirement. These federated models is a requirement of the future of AI in healthcare. Is that how you see it, Anthony? Like, is this a model that, hey, COVID, a silver lining of COVID, if you will, that COVID brought us together to do this model, and now we do it for 100 other things that we would love to work on, but maybe don't have the data ourselves? Is that how you look at these federated models, or is this just a COVID-19 and you probably might not see Fiona again?
Well, I certainly hope not, but I hope I'll see her many more times after this. No, I don't think this is a this is certainly not a COVID-specific technology platform as we move forward. Obviously, it was very important for us to be able to do this quickly to meet the need on this very short time scale. We've only been talking about maybe for generously 10 months. However, I think that the industry as a whole, as you look over the last 5 or 10 years, is moving toward very steadily recognition of the need for these types of technologies to meet this very unique thing that we have in medicine, where we have silos of data, but global need. And so when you put those two things together, it seems obvious to me that we can start to answer more and more complex questions. This is a very complex question, but there are more complex ones yet to answer, to combine forces and really get to the point where data access in the service of a model that performs at a standard that is required to get worldwide adoption. We have the technology stack to do that and the data availability to do that.
That's great. Fiona, anything you'd add to that?
No, I think it makes it super exciting. It used to be that it was really only with rare diseases that the groups then tended to collaborate and share knowledge and share patient data and things. But I think because AI requires large amounts of data usually, and particularly when we're going to try and iterate and improve the algorithms, then I think the necessity to have large data sets is really, really important. And I think the federated model, where groups are allowed to come together and without fear, without concerns about contravening their regulatory bodies and things, I think it makes it really, really exciting, and it makes it much more possible. And it's the fact that we can collaborate across continents where the regulations are quite different, and where the stringent things in the UK about certain things are completely different rules somewhere else. It's irrelevant, because we're not sharing the patient information. And I think that's what makes it so exciting. And we keep coming back to this generalizability. It's just what we want as clinicians. We want robust, reproducible things, that will produce repeatable results. And by having a generalizable tool, that's been tested widely or created widely, internationally across the globe, means that it's likely to work for all our patients, even though we have a very small percentage of one ethnic group compared to another ethnic group. It means that it'll be applicable to all of those patients. It shouldn't fail for a particular category, which makes it, it makes it excellent from my point of view.
Yeah, gives me the chills thinking about how that can address some of the diversity issues we deal with. That's awesome. Mona, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that, even though this was done for COVID, as Anthony said, perhaps COVID brought us together faster, and it encouraged people because to get together and work on this to get us an answer in these times. But this really can be generalized to so many, come to the generalizability point here in a different aspect, to so many different diseases, and especially, again, in rare diseases where you want to be able to gather data and train models, even though you don't have so much data at one specific site, to be able to have this collective learning from all of the different sites. So I see us using federated learning in many of its different flavors over the coming years.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I go back to something, I think it was Del Sanders from Health Catalyst that said, shared a Google study that said, can the algorithm make up for lack of data? And the result was basically no. That more data is better than a better algorithm. And so I think that's why this is really interesting, this federated model of getting access to more data to make these AI engines and results better. So thank you so much to each of you for spending the time here and helping us understand this exciting new era of AI in healthcare. So thank you so much, and thanks everyone for watching live. If you want to check out this and more great health IT content like it, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, John.